Hello and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm the Eater of Worlds.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to review and discuss It from 1990, an adaptation of Stephen King's It. Ian, why don't you give us the synopsis?
The story follows a group of adults who have left Derry in Maine. They have grown up outside the town but have been called back by an old friend of theirs to tell them that a monster that they thought they destroyed when they were children has returned 30 years later. The adults all go through flashbacks of what they went through as children and have decided to group together and finally destroy this evil being once and for all.
This is from director Tommy Lee Wallace, who you might recognise as the director for Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch.
Nice.
He was also the director for Fright Night Part 2. He was also a long-time collaborator and work friend of John Carpenter, being the main editor for both Halloween and The Fog. However, Tommy Lee Wallace's career has never really spanned that far, and he's never really been that successful, and a lot of his film projects really not that successful either, which is partially a shame. Although he has been criticised, especially over the It adaptation, as being a very poor craftsmanship, especially retrospectively looking back at a 27-year-old film.
Well, I mean, this came out at the same time, or around about the same time they were doing, the Tommyknockers, the Langoliers, the Langoliers, sorry. The Stand, and a lot of Stephen King's books were being adapted into TV programs
because budgets for theatrical releases of those films were ridiculous.
Yeah, obviously, we've got the big ones that became films: Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, Carrie, Stand By Me. Those ones are like the really big ones. But I remember watching this back in 1990 for the first time on TV, and wow, we're looking at a 3-hour epic here, ladies and gentlemen, unless you're watching it in 2 parts. The first part follows the children. I mean, we do get to start off with Mike Hanlon, played by Tim Reed, who has just come across another murder. Another child has been killed, and he's found a picture from his childhood. He then calls on the other adults from his childhood who made the promise to come back and destroy it finally. You then go to the different adults as Mike is calling them up. You've got Harry Anderson playing Richie Tozier. You've got Dennis Christopher playing Eddie Kaspbrak. Kaspbrak. You've got Richard Mazer playing Stan Uris. Annette O'Toole playing Beverly Marsh. Richard Thomas playing Bill Denborough. And John Ritter playing Ben Hansen. And each one that Mike will call up will flash back to a memory of them as children. As children, you've got Seth Green playing Richie. You've got Adam Farezi playing Eddie. Emily Perkins playing Beverly, Marlon Taylor playing the young Mike, Jonathan Brandis from Sequest DSV playing young Bill, and Brandon Crane playing a young Ben. The first part is probably the most memorable and probably the best part of this film.
Most definitely. And the child actors in this film, I think, do a much better job than their adult counterparts.
Yeah.
Which is usually quite a strange thing to say about a film. But I can't help but think of Stand By Me.
Yes.
And, that group of boys, that chemistry, that friendship. And it really does bleed into this group of characters in It and the troubles that they're having living in Derry, Maine, with this supernatural force which is scaring them to death.
Yeah.
Out of the child actors, of course, the most recognisable being Seth Green, as we know today for his comedy voices.
Yeah.
Kind of like his character in It, really. But amongst the child actors, the only other one that's of notable fame was Jonathan Brandis, as you mentioned, from Sequest. I also recognise him from Neverending Story 2.
Yeah, I recognised Emily Perkins because she went on to obviously play the sister in Ginger Snaps.
Yeah. And I always just thought it was a shame that actor Jonathan Brandis committed suicide at the age of 27. It's kind of like one of those actors that you thought you would still see today because of the delivery he's given in such past performances. But yeah, his career kind of waned and no one really knows for sure why he did it. But yeah.
It's always one of those things, though. You start off at such a young age. You know, we see it a lot.
Child actors, yeah.
Yeah, with Macaulay Culkin.
Drew Barrymore.
You know, there's just a lot of these children who start off really, really well. And then all of a sudden, you know, people are just like, well, we don't need you anymore. What am I going to do? Am I going to work in Co-op or Walmart, I suppose, in America?
So the adult actors out of those, I mean, Annette O'Toole, you probably remember her from Superman 3, where she played Lana Lang. And of course, you might recognise her as Clark Kent's mother in Smallville. We also have John Ritter, who I remember from Bride of Chucky.
Yeah, I always remember him from Problem Child.
Problem Child, yeah. And we also have Richard Thomas, who I'll always remember from Battle Beyond the Stars.
Yeah.
And of course, completing out the cast, you can't forget Tim Curry.
Oh, no. You never forget Tim Curry as Pennywise.
He's the most iconic character in the film. He's the poster boy for the film. He is, in my opinion, the fundamental origin of clown fear in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Still, his impact has gone on to the point where we still have the remake of It coming out eventually, and the clown scare craze, which is swept across America, and now over here too. And as soon as you see a scary clown image, you immediately think of Pennywise the dancing clown.
Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
But this is the thing. I mean, like we said, 3 hours long, and the first half really just sets up what the actors are going back to do. You know, we follow each one of the children, especially young Bill, whose brother Georgie is killed off right at the start when we're looking into Bill's flashback. And that is one of the sequences that always really sticks in my mind, is when Georgie's following his boat down the street. It's raining and he's just watching it, and then he loses it into the sewer, and then Pennywise appears. Now, I may not be the smartest man, but if you're a clown in a storm drain, I am getting the fuck out of there. But he's just so charismatic, you know. Oh, Georgie, why don't you come down here and play with the balloons? And Georgie, you know, being quite a smart kid, says, no, my dad says never to take anything. And it's the way he's like, well, I'm Pennywise the dancing clown, and you're Georgie. We're not strangers anymore. And I'm like, you're still in a fucking storm drain.
I, Georgie, am Pennywise the dancing clown. You are Georgie. So now we know each other. T-Rex.
I guess so.
Get out! Get out of there!
You're still not supposed to be in there. And it's the way the arm comes in. And the brilliant thing about this TV film adaptation is the use of scary imagery, but no blood or guts. And so when you see that arm come in and Pennywise's teeth have changed and his voice gets more aggressive, the way he grabs the arm and the teeth move forward, you know George has lost his arm. He's dead. And it sticks with Bill. You know, Bill brings it upon himself now to start investigating what's going on, because he starts to have weird little scary situations, like looking at his brother's picture book and it starts to be covered in blood.
When it winks at him, I still think that is probably the strongest scare in the entire film.
Yeah, and the parents not interacting with the blood like everybody else, like the children are. The children are seeing it and they're just like, what the fuck? And the parents are just oblivious. They're just kind of blinded. I suppose it's the power of it. You know, it's using it to fog the adults. And that would explain later on why the adults don't remember, because they've left the town and the power has kind of disappeared. But once they start remembering their childhood, it all starts flooding back.
I forgot.
That is it. The it creature in this film doesn't really get an explanation as to where it came from, how long it's really been there, except that they know that it has appeared every 30 or so years to kill a bunch of children before it hibernates again. And I can't help but think of Lovecraft yet again.
Yes.
You know, it is an ancient one. It is a all-powerful demonic entity from another time and place, which is inhabiting Derry, Maine, and feeding every 30 years before it sleeps again. And I just think that concept's great. You don't really need an explanation for it.
Yeah.
An explanation for it should drive you crazy or scare you to death, just like the impact it's having on this town, and especially on the kids, that it's driving to absolute terror before it consumes them.
It does say it loves the way children taste when they're most scared. And I'm just like, that in itself, I don't need to see blood or guts. Hearing that sends a shiver up my spine, makes me scared, and then makes me worry that I'm going to taste awesome to an ancient one.
Let go. Be afraid. You all taste so much better when you're afraid.
So yeah, the first half of the film is Flashback the movie, where Mike does call the other 6 characters, and we get to see extended flashbacks of them, as you said. They get their memories back, and we see them bonding together. We watch them building a dam. They become friends. They protect themselves and each other against Henry Bowers and his lynch mob of goons at school.
Burp. Oh my god, I hate
Belch.
Belch. That's right,
Yeah.
Belch.
And so, you know, we get to see them in their school life. We get to see these characters in their family life. And it almost seems like nobody in this town has any resemblance of normality when really compared to the main lead characters.
Yeah.
Beverly has a very alcoholic, abusive father.
Yes.
Again, his role is very watered down in the film. Ben, whose father had died, he is now living with his Christian auntie.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
he sort of has a rough time living there. Bill, his parents have kind of estranged from him. They've kind of never gotten over Georgie's death, and so they almost abandoned Bill. And the same for Eddie. His mother is all-controlling and won't let him ever leave the house. She's afraid that he's going to die, catch germs. Although I'll say that in the book, I think his mother was incredibly obese, and yet in the film version she's terribly thin. There's a lot of instances of difference from the book to the film. And a lot of the interpretations, I'd say, are pretty accurate. Some of the characters are slightly different, but the personalities are very much there. The biggest complaint I can have about this TV series from the book is that it is very watered down.
Yeah.
The book has a very gay or very homosexual encounter with Henry Bowers and one of his goons, where he sucks him off, and he sort of, even though he gives out a lot of
Abuse.
He even uses the N-word a hell of a lot in the book, and I think in the TV series he only uses it once, and he says it so fast you might not even hear it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the TV series is incredibly watered down from the book. There's quite, and obviously it has to. The TV series is still 3 hours long.
Yeah.
The book is a very long book, but so it's difficult to. So in terms of pacing, the TV series does run at a breakneck pace in order to hit all the main points from the book, but it does miss out on all that extra bit of character stuff that makes it feel like an odyssey.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the drawbacks of converting a book into a film, is that you always miss the detail, the extra detail. You know, in the films you don't ever have to describe the colour of the hair or the colour of their eyes or the way they're standing, because you've got an actor doing that. But you know, like you said, those extra little layers. I mean, I didn't even realize that Henry Bowers was that way inclined to be sucking off his friends. You know,
or he was having his friends suck him off.
Yeah. Well, people sucking themselves off. I don't know, but
at the same time, Beverly Marsh sort of witnesses this encounter, and it also sparks off her sexual awakening, as this is also a coming of age story.
Yeah, I mean, I like that little part where you've got young Ben, who's kind of fallen for Beverly, and so he obviously writes her a poem, and she gets abused by her father about, you know, what she's doing with boys, but then she believes it's Bill, you know, and because Bill is the writer of their friends, and so there's this kind of weird little love triangle going on, and it later reflects when they become adults because of the way that Beverly, you know, she greets everybody at the restaurant, but Bill is the one that she really kisses quite passionately, and then later realizes, hold on a minute, it wasn't him, it was older Ben. And you see that as Ben as an adult is the way, I suppose, he's always drinking. You know, he's successful, but he's drinking, and he's just flaunting himself to women all over the place, but his heart only lies with one person.
Here's something that will probably never appear in any televised or film adaptation of the book, dealing with the sexual nature, is that once the children have actually defeated it, and they get lost trying to make their way back out.
Right.
So Beverly has a gangbang with all of the boys to turn them into adults. And then they leave. And then they leave the town of Derry and grow older.
What?
Yes. Beverly Marsh has sex with all the boys at the age of 12, 13-ish. Yeah. Yeah.
Was she in the book? Is she being sexually abused by her father?
He likes to perform hymen checks an awful lot.
Right. Okay. So I suppose that would be why, obviously, she's slightly more sexually awakened than the rest of the boys.
And so it does add to the point where, I mean, the TV series or the TV adaptation omits that entirely.
Yeah.
And so Eddie at the end explains that he's still a virgin, whereas in the book he only ever slept with Beverly, which is why he loves his friends.
Yeah. I suppose, like I said, there are points in the books that you would just kind of
glaze right over.
Yeah,
and
you know.
I have to say, in the book as well, reading that scene in the book is, yes, you're kind of like, whoa, what? You've just defeated it. Like, you're not being possessed anymore, but strange things do happen, and a lot of people will try to omit that from the book. It's just the one bit that just catches people off guard when it happens.
I mean, Stephen King was on a lot of white powder during this time, you know.
Yeah.
He was writing as much as he could, but then again he was doing a lot of fucking powder, you know, that he didn't need to. But there's a lot of reflections in this that I got from other stories, like we said, the way Georgie is killed off and his parents, Bill's parents, obviously kind of ostracize him, remind me a lot of Stand By Me. You know, in the film, Will Wheaton's brother has passed away, and his parents are exactly the same with him. You know, like we said, the way that the town acts, it looks busy, but in the TV adaptation, the town looks quite deserted. Most of the time, you only ever see the children. So it always kind of reminds me of The Stand, the way how a lot of the towns are deserted by some evil presence has come along. But like we said, getting to some really cool bits. I mean, Pennywise the clown, his situations, the way Tim Curry carries his character to scare the children. He doesn't need half the time the contact lenses or the scary teeth. Because, like I said, he's very charismatic, saying to them, come on down to the sewers. We all float down here. Everybody remembers that line. We all float down here. And the way he just kind of appears, that shower scene where he forces the drain open, you know, and then kind of just steps out. And I'm like, oh, what the fuck, you know?
This is a little inconvenient, Eddie. Here I am, Wheezy. Hey, you're gonna like it down here.
Yeah, it's very creepy. It's not that scary. It's the fact that he just taunts them.
Yes,
And
yes.
and he really does. Well, he scares the kids, but as audience members, well, as more adult audience members watching this, it's kind of funny now, and it's kind of Tim Curry's performance. It's funny and scary.
Yeah, I remember it mainly troubling me when I was a child because, you know, I'd seen a lot of horror movies, but your horror characters, maybe, you know, Freddy getting to Nightmare on Elm Street 4 would start to become more charismatic. You hadn't ever seen a horror character be smiling at you and beckoning you to come and play with him, because you're like, why isn't he running at me with a knife, you know, or hiding in the shadows? This thing is just standing blatantly out in the daylight, you know.
Again, here's another difference between the book, is that it, in the TV series, as Pennywise the Clown, appears a hell of a lot more than he does in the book. In the book, he does take on the form of a mummy, decomposing corpses, the Wolfman, and various other monsters, and he doesn't always take on the form of the Pennywise the Clown, which I guess in the TV version, maybe budget restraints, they just wanted a more iconic villain. They wanted more Tim Curry, seeing the delivery that he was giving as the character, and so Pennywise gets a lot more screen time than he does page time.
It works very well because, like, when Mike turns up as the kid version of Mike, and he starts explaining to the Losers Club, as we would get to know them, is that, you know, Derry has gone through a lot of traumatic instances every 30 years, and people have disappeared and children have died, and yet it all falls back to this clown figure. Later on, when the adults turn up, you're kind of like, we want to see more Pennywise. We want to see more Pennywise. And the ending to the second part of it is so weak. I thought it was just me when I was a kid. I thought, oh, you know, when I sat down to watch this again, I'm like, well, maybe it was just me as a kid. I was kind of getting bored after fucking 3 hours of sitting here, you know. But you follow them into the drains again. And when you see that intergalactic spider thing, I kind of like the prosthetic effects, but compared to the an hour and a half, almost 2 hours of Tim Curry performances you've got, the spider is nowhere near as fucking scary.
No, I think today it's the special effects look horribly dated, and the way that it moves, it has no menace or grace.
Yeah.
It's just a lumbersome special effect. And it does feel like a very anticlimactic ending. And unfortunately, it's the biggest criticism of Stephen King. He doesn't know how to end his fantastic stories. And so whether you read the book or whether you watch this TV series, it still ends with a big spider creature. So in the final battle, they're all scared out of their minds, and I think they're more scared now as adults than they were as kids. Maybe they got so much more to lose.
Yeah.
But it's again their friendship that brings them together, and their belief in a magic that will protect them. A belief that an asthma inhaler contains battery acid, like young Eddie used against Pennywise.
Yeah.
He gets the courage to go off and face his asthma inhaler at a demigod.
Yeah.
But this demigod isn't taking no shit and picks Eddie up and squeezes the life out of him.
It's like with the dead lights as well. You know, you see the lights, the weird light turn up when they're children. I mean, it's moving through the pipes.
It kills off one of Henry Bauer's lackeys. It grabs Belch and forces him through the tunnel backwards, or the pipe backwards, which is that always stuck with me. The horrible contorted body shape as you see his hands touch his feet as he gets pulled through.
Yeah.
And then Henry Bauer's looking right into the deadlights and immediately from fear having a complete white set of hair.
But for me, when you get to the final sequence, the deadlights are kind of like the integral part because that's what they aim for. That's how they end up weakening it and destroying it. But, you know, like I said, with all the stuff with Tim Curry doing his stuff, it's never brought up. It's never mentioned. You don't ever see it until, like we said, the final bit with the kids, or when older Bill's girlfriend turns up to Derry to find him. She gets caught by Pennywise and his deadlights and goes into a catatonic state. And then in the final sequence, 3 of them are all caught, like, oh my god, the blinding lights, and then they destroy it. And I'm just like, okay, maybe it went into deeper in the book.
Well, no, it pretty much plays out the same in the book, except that when they defeat the creature, they realize that it's female, and that they actually find that it's laid eggs.
Right.
And then they go and crush all the eggs as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that gets me as well in this adaptation. Is there's a door. The adults find a door leading into its lair.
Lots of skulls and skeletal remains.
Yeah. Now, I've just sat through like 2 hours of it, or 2.5 hours of it leading up to the final battle sequence, and from what I gather is that it can take on any form it wants, appear anywhere it wants, do whatever the fuck it wants, wherever the fuck it wants, while it's still this weird spider thing in the lair, right?
Yeah.
So, why does it need a door? Does he go out the door before he goes up the dairy? Or does he just, did he convince somebody to build him a door years and years ago? It's just like...
Maybe the door was already there, and I don't know, maybe he's using that same sort of fog that he has on the rest of the townspeople, so that when anybody else is in there, they just see a wall.
Yeah.
It's kind of magically protected and enclosed so that no one else can get down there, but maybe he does need the door so that he can drag the bodies into the lair.
But that's the thing. He kills most of the children out in the town.
Yeah, but you still see loads of bodies in webs being suspended up.
Yeah.
So I'm like, does he wake up during his 30 years to go and feed on people and then go back to sleep again?
Yeah, or does he just eat them all, gorge himself, and then pass out from a food coma and then wake up and be like, well, I'm completely out of food. I need to go do this.
I finally made it, guys. I'm in the deadlights now.
And you know what? It's true what they say. We all float down here, and you will too. In fact, they all float.
Some of the sequences in this film are really well done. The adult actors do really work their parts, and I feel like they must have conversed with the younger actors to get how they were feeling so that they could replicate those feelings in the adult parts. And I think that must have been really, really good. People like Jonathan Brandis, when he's at a young age, talking to somebody as big as Richard Thomas, must have helped him make Bill, from both parts work really, really well. Like we said, both girls playing Beverly, they come across really, really well of this weak yet also badass character. She's constantly being beaten down by the different men in her life, but then she's constantly always fighting back. She even says herself she fell in love with a man who's exactly like her father.
Very abusive. And again, there's a lot more detail in the book as to how she became that way and why.
Well, I'd probably go on the limb of saying a gangbang in a sewer probably started off.
when her in the book, when her husband first slaps her, it is another massive sexual awakening. She kind of hates it, but also really likes it.
Right. Okay.
Until she gets to the point where, again, she is totally sick of it and she wants something normal.
No!
Instead of 2 weeks!
Not ever again!
I'll tell you who the biggest prick in the film is.
Yeah.
And it's Audrey's friend, Bill's publisher or agent,
Yes, yeah.
who turns up and he's like, well, your half-wit husband's gone, so let's get it on.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't want to get it on? Well, you better fucking turn up to work tomorrow or I'll have you. You won't like me when I'm angry. And I'm like, who is this chump? He's turned up for one scene and I fucking hate him.
I hated him more than I hated Henry Bowers' character. I mean, young Henry Bowers is played really well because he's playing the greaser kind of...
Yeah, I like his performance in this. He is scary, but he's, again, very watered down. As in the book, he does actually cut Ben Hanscom with the knife and engrave... he gets the H cut into his belly before he is kicked away.
Yeah.
And so he's a lot more vicious in the book, but at the same time in the book we get to see his family life. We get to see how horrible his home life is, and you can sort of understand why he is troubled the way he is. And in the TV series, he only has a throwaway line that his dad's going to be pissed when he finds out. It's like,
Yeah, I always took that myself, is that, you know, he's violent and aggressive to everybody else. So in experience, you know, his home life must be pretty bad. And then weirdly enough, then I start to feel sympathetic to him, that it's not really his fault that he's like that. It's the upbringing that he's been brought into. And then it's like later on when he's broken out of the mental institution and he goes in and has that fight with Mike. You know, everyone's just like, oh yeah, he admitted to all the killings, but it wasn't really him. And I'm like, you guys don't feel sympathetic to him. Oh, but he bullied us when we were children. I'm like, all right, you know, forgive and forget and all that shit. He's been forced into most of these situations by his family. He was framed by all these murders by an ancient demigod, you know, and he's been broken out to get revenge on you because he's been manipulated for every step of the way. Is he the bad guy?
well, yeah. Despite its running length, and despite, for all intents and purposes, the film now feeling very mediocre, it's still entertaining. And as a result, there are so many moments in the film that will spark your interest in resuming the rest of the runtime. Of course, Tim Curry, Pennywise the Clown, every time he's on screen, you're transfixed by his performance, whether you think it's hilarious, whether he's scary, or whether you're just interested in how it's going to play out. And for a lot of the scenes, he usually does turn up. He reminds everyone that things float where he comes from, and then he waves goodbye and disappears, and he lets the kids escape almost every time. Or I really like the scene where I think it's Richie who's turning back up in the town. Pennywise is hitchhiking with some balloons on the side of the road,
Yeah.
and as he sees him goes past, he points at him like, oh, I remember you. And then the balloon is in the back of the cab with Ben. Really like that. I always remember the shower scene with Eddie, with all of the shower heads just extending out and blocking his path. Very good. Bill's photo diary with his brother winking at him and then bleeding everywhere. Bev, when she goes to the bathroom and the blood balloon bubble comes up and the voice is saying, help me. Coming from the sink, and then the father with his hands in the bloody sink going, what is it, Bev? I can't see anything. It's just, those moments just, very memorable. I also really enjoyed the cinema sequence. Now, this is going to be the fakest cinema audience I think I've ever seen, or I just don't go to the cinema on a Saturday morning when it's filled with kids anymore. But they're all screaming constantly and throwing popcorn at each other. I'm like, is anyone watching the film? Are you really reacting to what's on screen? It just... How are these kids watching this horror movie?
Oh, it's a 1960s black and white. I was a teenage werewolf. Those things were terrifying back in the day.
Yeah, well, it's kind of fitting because I think that Stephen King's It, the book, is for adults. It, the TV adaptation, is a kid's movie. Now, there's very little blood. There's very little harsh language. All the sexual content has really been reduced to nothing. And me, myself as a kid, and you, watched this as a child. And it seems that this film's legacy of scariness has come from all of us that were children that have now grown up. And now we look back at this film and go, that was scary. Until you watch it again. And then when you watch it again, you go, that's not scary, that's funny. And I remember Tim Curry still being funny. And that's it. So the scare factor is gone, although the inherent fear of clowns might still be there for some people. I think this is a great first horror movie for kids. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, most of my favourite sequences all really involve Pennywise, you know. When he first turns up and takes out Georgie, you're screaming at the TV like, no, do not put your arm in there. Just fucking don't. And that's a really good lesson for children. Don't ever put your arm into a storm drain, especially one containing a clown. Yeah, when Ben goes to where Pennywise is and he sees his father there, You know, you're just like Ben's completely shocked, and then it's the camera cutting back and the father changing ever so slightly every now and again until he finally becomes Pennywise, and then that weird skeleton thing comes out. You know, like Gary said, Eddie and Pennywise in the shower, just absolutely brilliant. Richie. Now, this is probably one of the weakest scares, but it just always sticks with me, is that Richie is scared by a werewolf. Now, he's played by Seth Green, who will go off into Buffy the Vampire Slayer to play a werewolf. And it even makes me laugh as well that the principal is the cigarette smoking man from X-Files. I'm just like, there's so many TV references in here. It's just brilliant. The Losers Club, when they all sit down together, especially with Mike, and they start looking at the picture of Pennywise, and he starts doing all those flips, and then he gets up in front of the camera, and he's like, "You're all gonna die. You're all gonna die." But by this point, I'm like, you had multiple opportunities to kill them all off, and you don't. You're like an evil James Bond villain, taunting them, telling them.
He has to scare them enough to the point where they become a delicacy for him.
Yeah, and I suppose every time he scares them, as a group of friends, they all just get back together and not so scared anymore. So he goes off and he deals with other people. The battle with Pennywise in the drains, you know, leading up from the Henry Bauer sequence and his hair all turning white to the Pennywise grabbing Stan, slamming him up against the wall, the battery acid, the silver. And I mean, like I said, the special effects aren't great, but I still always like that little weird flip he does down the plug hole, you know, and just disappears, and then the hand thing goes,
and then the gurgling as he dies.
Yeah. And then when you get into part 2, the Pennywise sequences are still brilliant, but the adult actors play it just as well as the child actors. When adult Bill is in the graveyard and he sees Pennywise digging the grave and telling them, "You can't have that one at the end because that one's already taken," and you already know who's in it, but Bill doesn't. You're just like, you're such a fucking bastard. The library sequence will always probably be the one that really, really sticks in my mind as the best one, because Pennywise is shouting down to Richie to get out, and Richie's having to shout at the librarian, and the librarian stood there like, what, why are you shouting?
I love everyone flinching as the balloon burst in front of them, and I'm like, they didn't have the special effects or the editing or anything else to fix that. So,
but it's only slight flinching, you know, a balloon going off in your face, and they
blood splashes all over you.
They just, how many takes must have been to go, right, that one, you're moving the tiniest amount, and it's all his little jokes. The jokes are so bad, but you can't help but laugh at them. "Hello, is your refrigerator running? Well, you best go get it now. And you're just like, oh my God.
Excuse me, ma'am. Is your refrigerator running? It is. Well, you better catch it before it runs away.
The Chinese restaurant, I mean, I like them all getting together and being all friends, but then it's the fortune cookies, and there's just the woman coming in again, like, "Is everything all right?" And you've got this eyeball staring at you like, "Yeah, everything's good."
Oh, another favourite scene that I've forgotten is when Beverly goes back to her house.
Yeah.
And it says Marsh on the door, and she rings it.
Just about to get to this one.
"Oh, I stole it. I stole it from you." And the old lady that comes out, she's like, "Oh, I remember your father. I'm Mrs. Kirsch. Come on in."
Yeah.
She makes her a cup of tea, and she sits there and she gulps that tea down.
And then zombie dad appears
Yeah.
and chases her out. And then Pennywise is there, and then you realise that she was hallucinating it the whole time. And I always question of, did she actually go in the house, or was she always just stood out in the street the whole time? And it's that final bit with the little balloon that kind of bounces down the road. You know, he's just like, what the fuck? The "kiss me fat boy" sequence. You know, oh my God. It's just such a brilliant line. He's making out with Beverly, and then he looks in the mirror and realizes that she's wearing clown pants. And you're like, what the fuck? I think for me, the only two bits in this movie that in this TV adaptation that I really don't like is the final sequence with the weird spider thing, especially when they beat it to death. And I'm like, okay, you should have just listened to Richie and brought a machine gun. You know, that would have worked. And the fucking security guard in the mental institute who gets eaten by Pennywise the Rottweiler. You know, it's the way that the he looks at the feet, and then he looks at the hand that is waving to him, and then as he looks up, he sees that CGI fucking head thing. But the way the camera slowly falls on the garden, he's like, ah!
A lot of people get killed by wipes or fade outs or crossfades in this film.
Yeah.
Again, all the gore and everything is kind of taken away, leaves it to your imagination, which is fine.
Yeah. I do and I don't recommend Stephen King's It. I definitely recommend it to anybody who watched it when they were younger and, you know, really like Stephen King's stuff, have watched all of his film adaptations and watched all of his TV adaptations. I mean, if you've gone the full 5 hours for The Stand, then you can stand 3 hours going through it. If you can go through The Langoliers, which is probably the worst one I've ever been through, then you can make it through it. But if you're a fresh viewer, and especially if you're an adult who didn't see it when you were a child, you're probably going to find it's quite weak. You're probably going to find the special effects are quite bad. The acting might keep you going, especially to all the different sequences. But for 3 hours, and especially when you get to that ending, you'll just be like, I should have fucking turned it off earlier.
Despite the acting credits of some of the lead actors as adults, I think that the chemistry is not really there like it was when they were children.
Yeah.
I often find watching their scenes very wooden and very, you know, page by page. It's almost as if they're just reading from the script. There's not much emotion coming from them. It's not as much as I'd like. I really think that the acting in this film is the weakest part of the whole thing. The special effects, yeah, they're a bit crappy, but I can deal with bad special effects. Bad acting, you know, you can't fix. If it's broken, it's broken. And
yeah.
I don't think the acting works. I think when I watched the film as a child, the acting was fine. It all felt real.
Yes.
But by today's standard, the acting is borderline terrible. And I think that will put a lot of people off because it is such a long film. However, and as you've said, if you're an adult and you've never seen this film, I have to say skip it. Because it's not going to hold up like it does in everyone else's nostalgia for this film. So I think you'll have a very hard time enjoying it unless you can appreciate it for what it was and the impact it had when it came out. If you have seen this film before, revisiting it could just kill it for you. You might just be like, I remember that was great. Holy shit, why did I think that was great? This is terrible. I have to sit through 3 hours? Oh my god. It's probably best watching it in 2 parts. Or you can do like what we did and marathon through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the pacing of the film is a hell of a lot better than the book. Because the book decides, hey, you've had this character moment. Now we're going to go and explore all these other members and all these other townspeople of Derry just to give you more of a sense of the scale of the problem that it is presenting to this town.
Yeah.
If I had to recommend, I would recommend the book. Because the book hasn't aged. Whereas this TV adaptation has aged. There's still moments in the TV series, the TV film that is scary and it is funny, and there are just a couple of performances that are interesting. So it's very difficult for me to recommend it. It's one of those where you have to take a chance if you've never seen it before.
I will say now, I am quite worried about the new movie adaptation.
Well,
I imagine an hour and a half. You know, we're probably looking at the first part of the TV movie. It will probably just revolve around the children. And ultimately, if you've seen the TV movie and you've read the book, you kind of know what this new film is going to be like.
It's going to end with a giant spider.
Yeah, and silver to the face.
No gangbangs, though. Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.
you in your dreams. Oh, come back anytime. Bring your friends.